we are going to discuss some important questions that has been asked on the previous examinations. It is the INI recall questions. Okay, we will see one by one. Now, the key idea about this INI exams which has recently come up is that they are going more towards clinical orientation, and the questions are of more clinical in nature, and CPCR is an important component which has come up recently, because it is also important because 2020 October they have come up with the recent guidelines. So that is why the INI, such a good institutes, are asking questions on this. So we will discuss few important areas which has been asked, recollected, and also we will also try to get some information in and around that, so that you will be able to answer the maximum number of questions based on that. Clear? You got the point? Right. So with this idea, we will start our INI discussion. The first question on this. Okay. Now, the central supply of which of the following gas is through the blue pipeline of the image shown below? You can see from the image that there are three pipelines here, 1, 2, and 3, which is commonly seen in any of our hospital wall, or especially in the operation theatre wall, or in where you will see all this pipeline. They have brought this question just to introduce to you to find out whether you are going and attending the regular operation theatres and things like that. I told you, the clinical orientation is becoming a bigger hand nowadays. Okay, so that is why you get such kind of question, very common question which you commonly encounter. Now, the answer for this, whenever you see blue anywhere in our entrance area, it is nitrous oxide. That's the simplest clue. Whenever you see, and if to be precise, it is French blue. French blue. French blue is the official color which we give for nitrous oxide, and nitrous oxide is an agent, induction agent, very poor induction agent, but an excellent analgesic agent which has got a MAC value of 104. That since the MAC value is very high, that means it has got a very poor inducing power. Okay, because it is inversely proportional to potency. MAC value is inversely proportional to potency, and potency is the ability of an inducing agent to make the patient unconscious. Okay, got the point. Now, with this idea, we will know something about like H cylinders. H cylinders are the most commonly used one which stores nitrous oxide, and from the manifold that is usually situated below the hospital tanks, it comes through the pipeline. These pipelines are made of copper. That is another important question. Remember, the cylinders are made up of molybdenum steel, while the pipelines are made of copper. This is an important question. Okay, from these H cylinders in the bank, below the baseline or below the ground floor, you have such banks over there, and from the banks comes above to places where it is being utilized. Most importantly, operation theatres. Nitrous oxide are used there. Okay, so how do they come, or how it is usually with a very high pressures you see it in cylinders. From there it gets reduced to the pressure by two pressure reducers, and when it comes to the operation theatres, they will be only up to the pressure of 50 to 60 psig. That is also an important question. 50 to 60 psig. Clear? So it is almost equivalent to an intermediate pressure level system. When you talk in terms of pressure system in machines, I think in our class we have discussed the high pressure, intermediate pressure, and low pressure. So this you get it in the intermediate pressure system. Okay. Now after that, you also need to remember a cylinder called E cylinders. E cylinders. Also, H cylinder is the one which you get in a manifold, and E cylinders are seen behind the Boyle's machine. That is also an important question. E cylinders, you can remember by a simple code like emergency cylinders. Clear? That's an important point which you need to remember. Now, another point is regarding the critical temperature. See, critical temperature is also a question. Is 36.5 degrees centigrade. It is a temperature above which you cannot liquefy a gas, however pressure you apply onto the gas. That's the definition. Okay, so that is the reason why nitrous oxide exists as a liquid form in most of the cylinders. Clear? So with this question, we have got a reasonable idea about how the nitrous oxide cylinders are there in the manifold, their size, how do they come up, what is the emergency cylinder size, and how do we detect them, what is the pressure in that. And also you should know at the end, see, from this figure you can see this comes here, and this is what I'm going to draw. It can be of two distribution pattern. One is called DISS, or what is the full form? Diameter indexed safety system. That is, diameter index safety system is to which you connect your machines. Machine hoses are connected to any of these two end points of the pipeline. One is diameter index safety system, or another option is called quick couplers, non-interchangeable quick couplers. That is also important. Non-interchangeable quick couplers. Now you know the gas comes as pipelines and it is distributed to the machine and by two interfaces. It can either be a DIS or it can be a quick coupler. These are the two, and both cannot be, they are agent specific. That means you cannot connect a oxygen hose to a DIS of a nitrous oxide because the diameter varies. That is why it is diameter indexed. Got the point? So that is why you need to know that what is the importance of DIS and quick couplers. So these are the two options whereby you get the pipeline gases at the operation theater. Okay. Now there is also one more point which you need to understand regarding the oxygen. Oxygen is usually white in color. Oxygen is usually white in color, and vacuum is usually a yellow in color, and it is a larger diameter. Vacuum is usually a larger diameter. It is yellow in color, and also please remember one more question on this. It produces a 300 millimeters of mercury pressure. So in normal operation theater settings. So these are the three questions on this. Oxygen is white in color, and also you need to remember the air, which comes as black. Oxygen is white, air is black. Clear? Now vacuum is usually, you can also see if you look carefully here in this figure, this is vacuum. Vacuum is usually produced by a yellow type of pipelines. Clear? Got the point? So vacuum is yellow. So this is the idea about you need to know regarding the pipeline systems. Okay. Now we will see to the next question. Now before the next question, I just want you to add some important points about another gadgets which is coming up very popular in this COVID scenario. This is about the liquid oxygen tank. Liquid oxygen tank. Now why is liquid oxygen tank important? Because it contains oxygen at a very high pressure, so that 1 ml of liquid oxygen can generate 841 ml of gaseous oxygen. So it is easy to carry. Got the point? And it is usually kept at -1. You know the critical temperature of oxygen is -116 degrees centigrade. So it is usually kept at -160 degree centigrade. It is usually kept below the critical temperature of oxygen, and if it becomes economical only when there is a constant use. Okay, if you don't require much regular supply of high volume of oxygen, implanting or installing a liquid oxygen plant is not very good option. But if you need a very high supply, then this is probably a very economical option. Okay. Now it is usually set in a place where there is easy access for vehicles, which and always beware, this should not be kept in a place where you have a chance for inflation or inflammability of liquid oxygen is very high. So you have to keep that area very secured, and there should not be any fire hazard near that. Okay, so these are important points which you need to remember about liquid oxygen. Also remember, it is actually stored in a almost like our vacuum flask. It has got two walls with inside which is actually a vacuum. This is vacuum, and they have two insulated walls, and pedalite is usually used to coat inside. Okay, so these are all safety mechanism that it should not produce any kind of sudden expansion, and there is always a pressure monitor to see whether there is proper pressure maintained within, and whenever there is a rise in pressure in the liquid tank, it actually vents out the excess oxygen. Okay, so that is how the pressure is maintained. So at this juncture of COVID and lot of news about liquid oxygen plants and liquid oxygen cylinders, I thought this will be useful for your next exam. So please remember about these values, which is important to you. Okay, now with this idea, we will go to the next question. All are true about high quality CPR, chest compression and CPR. Okay, so this is what you are going to do. What they are given the first question. See, the first option is chest compression at a rate of 100 to 120. That is correct. Chest compression is 100 to 120, correct. Depth of compression should be between 5 to 6 centimeters. That is also correct. It should be compressed in such a way that at least 5 centimeters, that means 2 inches, or it should not exceed more than 6 centimeters, that means 2.4 inches. So it should be between 2 to 2.4 inch or 5 to 6 centimeters. Okay, because over compression will take lot of time for the chest to recoil back. So you should provide adequate time for recoil. That's an important aspect which you need to remember. Clear? And allow complete recoil, and ventilation rate at 20 to 24. No. Ventilator rate at 20 to 24 breaths per minute is not at all an indication in adult patients. It is usually 1 per 6 seconds. So it will only say that you need to give around 10 breaths per minute. So 10 breaths per minute, while you need to give a higher breath like 20 to 30 only in case of pediatrics. Okay, so it is 10 breaths per minute is a correct answer. Okay, so ABC is the correct option in this question. Now they have been constantly asking this question, what is the correct sequence? That's a very common question that has been repeated many times in the recent exam. So I thought this diagram you will never forget, and one of my favorite actors. So this is, we call him happily as SRK. This is my simple mnemonic to remember the sequence. See, what does it indicate? It indicates that S means scene safety. Make sure the scene is safe. You are not into trouble. That's the first step in any resuscitation scenario. If the patient is in the road, make sure the road is safe. The patient is in the environment, make sure there is no electricity, there is no other environmental hazard coming to damage you or hamper you. So that is scene safety. R is response. Response is not pulse check. Response is actually call, bar touch or tap at the shoulder. Okay, so that is response. C for the response. The next option is K. Remember, SRK. K is call for help and ask to get a defibrillator. Call for help and ask to get a defibrillator. It's a common terminology. Clear? So SRK. SRK is vital compressions. Then comes check for vitals. Now check for vitals. What are the vitals you are looking for? You are looking for the carotid pulse. And at the same time, you will be also seeing for the respiration, whether the patient is moving or not. Now, the most important thing you need to remember is it should be less than 10 seconds. It should not exceed more than 10 seconds. More than 10 seconds, nothing should be. No procedure in CPR should go beyond 10 seconds. So, what I am trying to say, that's an important question, that all things happening other than compression should be restricted to less than 10 seconds. So less than 10 seconds is a maximum time which you can interrupt a compression. So that's the point. So less than 10 seconds. Okay. Check for the vitals. And then start compression. This is the correct sequence of events that you should do in a case of witnessed or unwitnessed cardiac arrest. Unwitnessed cardiac arrest. Clear? So SR case, vital compressions. Please remember that. It's very, very useful for you. Clear? Now a few points about compressions I thought I will share with you, which will help you in solving many of your questions. Like 30:2 is the ratio in adult patient, whether you are a single rescuer or multiple rescuer. No questions on that. The depth of compression is 5 centimeter or 2 inch to 6 centimeter, that is 2.4 inch. Minimum interruptions in compressions. Make sure you don't waste anything you don't waste any time other than compressions. Like it is exclusively compression that matters. Clear? So less than 10 seconds should be the time which is needed to check the pulse, assess, etc. And within 5 minutes you should be able to administer adrenaline or epinephrine. That is very important, because adrenaline has come up in the recent guideline in 2020, and they put a word to that, ASAP. That means administer as early as possible. Okay, so that is an important point which you need to remember. Now another point regarding this, if you want to give atropine, which has come up as a treatment in bradycardia induced or symptomatic bradycardia. In symptomatic bradycardia, you can give atropine, not in all cardiac arrest. Regularly, it is contraindicated. But in symptomatic bradycardia, do give. In that situation, you need to provide what's the dose of atropine. Initially, 2015, it was 0.5. Now it has come up 1 milligram. That is an important point. And remember, what is the dose of adrenaline here? It is 1 in 10,000. That's an important question, because 1 in 10,000, it usually comes as 1 in 1,000 ampule. You need to dilute it to 10 ml and give 1 by 1. So 1 in 10,000 is the dose to give IV adrenaline in CPCR, and atropine is 1 milligram. Clear? These are the points which you need to remember. It is a must. Okay. Next. After that, breath rate. See, it is 1 breath in 6 seconds. So you will be able to give around 10 breaths per minute. 10 breaths per minute is sufficient, because that will produce a good time for chest to recoil. Recoiling is an important factor. Now, if you do how much ever efficiently, the maximum amount of cardiac output you can produce is only 25 to 30%. So the maximum you can produce by manual compression is only 30%. Maximum is 30%. Remember that. You can't do that. But however, chest compression fraction you should try to maintain at a percentage of 80%. Chest compression fraction should be maintained at 80%. That's an important question. Next question, what you are going to get here is this. Now we will see something about the drugs used in CPCR. See, drugs are important. Adrenaline, we have seen that concentration is 1 in 10,000, repeated at 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, and as early as possible. These are the MCQs. Now regarding the next drugs, lignocaine and amiodarone have both considered as an antiarrhythmic. They have been escalated, and their role has been improved in CPCR in 2020 guidelines. So they are asking when to give. It is after the third shock. Okay, so when to give is after the third shock, and how much concentration? That's the next question. About the lignocaine, it is 1.5 milligram per kilogram per is for the first dose. And the second dose should be only 0.5 milligram per kilogram. Got the point? Now next is regarding amiodarone. The first dose is high, 300 milligram, and the next dose is subsequent dose is 150 milligram. These are the questions you will get on that. Atropine we have seen, it has already become 1 milligram. Clear? Now after that, one more point which you need to remember about, we have already seen atropine, and the next point is regarding the compression. The rate of compression is 100 to 120 compressions per minute. Compressions per minute, 100 to 120, not beyond 120 and not below 100. These are the two extremes which you can have, because below 100 CCF comes down, the compression fraction comes down. Above 120 there will not be adequate time for recoiling. So these are the 2 points why you want to make it anything between 100 to 120. Okay, now we will see few questions on the pediatric. In the pediatric CPR, there are few changes which has come recently which can be asked as a question to you. See, one breath has to be given in every 2 to 3 seconds. That is one question. So the compression rate has increased. Chest compression rate, not the chest compression, remember it is the respiratory rate has increased. It was 1 in 6 seconds in adult, while in pediatrics it is 1 in 2 to 3 seconds. So it will come around 20 to 30 breaths per minute. Okay, so that is a higher amount of compression. You need to remember that. Next, remember it is the concept of uncuffed tube for a long time in pediatrics, because subcricoid region is considered to be the narrowest part in pediatrics. Most of us have studied that, but remember now they started suggesting not to use uncuffed tube. You need to go for cuffed tubes. Cuffed tubes. Cuff tubes are special that they contain micro cuff. Micro cuff. In the micro cuff, the pressure should be in such a way that you should not inflate it more than 25 seconds. You should not inflate it more than 25 centimeters of water. That is also an important question. Okay. Now after that, we should also remember few points about the pediatric compressions. Okay. Now I told you the recent change, initially we were talking about 2-finger compression. Now it has come up to encircling, 2-thumb encircling technique. This has come up recently, and it has also suggested that don't apply cricoid pressure and struggle wasting time. So you can avoid cricoid pressure in pediatrics as far as 2020 guidelines are concerned. Now I am coming with another concept which has come up recently, and it is going to be a definite question you. See, this is what is known as the chain of survival, isn't it? Chain of survival. In chain of survival, you have got a new guest called recovery. This has been recently added up. Recovery has been recently added up, and this is an important question. You can definitely get this. Okay, so recovery is the 6th chain that has been added to the chain of survival. The other questions on after resuscitation, when you start compressing, your addition of EtCO2, end-tidal carbon dioxide for CPCR has also come up recently, and they say you can use EtCO2 even when the patient is not intubated. That means the patient is having just a mask also, you can use EtCO2. That's an important change, because they are depending a lot on feedback devices as well as EtCO2, end-tidal carbon dioxide. Now, if you are compressing normally, you will get only 10, 20, that kind of EtCO2. But suddenly you see when the EtCO2 goes up more than 40, that means you are having what is known as ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation. That means you are successful in regaining the patient. Okay, so ROSC is indicated by presence of an EtCO2 which is more than 40. Clear? Now, once you get ROSC, your next idea start, which is known as targeted temperature management. Try to maintain a temperature of 32 to 36 degrees centigrade at least for 24 hours. That is also another question. Now, the idea is to maintain a systolic blood pressure of more than 90. That is also an important question. You should also make sure the value of 65 millimeters of mercury. What is this? This is mean arterial pressure target. So that's the next value. And always remember a new term which has come up, which is known as neuroprognostication. Neuroprognostication. Neuroprognostication is a new term which has come up recently, and this is important because this tell you that how much brain is patent, or how much you have been able to project out that how this patient is going to regain his consciousness and how his higher function is that. This should never be done before 72 hours. It should be done only after 72 hours. That's an important diagram or a figure of neuroprognostication in American Heart Association Circulation October journal, from which I have taken this chain of survival also. It's their patented thing, that this photograph, and it has been popular, and American Heart Association is the most widely practiced and the most efficient and scientifically done studies on resuscitation. That's why they are so popular, and world over we are following it. Okay, so make sure they have got a new diagram also about neuroprognostication. So if you see a diagram with regard to CPCR, which says that EEG, MRI, etc., that shows neuroprognostication. That's also an important point which you need to remember, which has come up recently in 2020 guidelines. Okay, now identify this chart. It is very easy to identify this chart. When you see a laryngoscope, of a different type, see you have different laryngoscopes, it is very easy to identify that is an airway cart. So most of the time airway cart will have a laryngoscope. They will also have a Goodell's airway. Remember, you know, Goodell's airway is a curved kind of thing like this, you remember? Goodell's airway, it will be commonly seen. There will be other associated video laryngoscopes, etc. This is a video laryngoscope, what you can see here, etc. So I'll also tell you what are the other cards which you need to remember in this regard. Clear? We will quickly go through this. Now if you see such a kind of graph or such a kind of photograph, then you can see this is also an airway cart, but this is difficult airway cart. Now why I call it as difficult airway cart? Because it consists of many other things other than the laryngoscope. It has definitely laryngoscope, but other than that it has many other things like fibroscope. Can you see the fibroscope? There is a glidoscope, etc. And there is a video laryngoscope above here. You have a video laryngoscope, etc. So whenever you see a monitor and on which you are going to see vocal cord, which can be attached to any laryngoscope, it is known as video laryngoscope. That is also an important question which you are going to get. It can be also be connected to any monitor as well. Okay, the next question is about this card. This is a CVP kit. Now how do you identify a CVP kit? It's very easy. See, it can be a single lumen CVP kit. It can be a double lumen CVP kit 1 and 2, and it can as well be 1, 2 and 3 lumen. 1, 2 and 3 triple lumen kit. This is also possible. These are called CVP catheters used to measure the CVP. Now not only CVP, it is mainly used to measure the or administer inotropic drugs directly to the heart. The point is at the junction between SVC and right atrium. That is a point where you have to keep the CVP tip, okay, while inserting the CVP catheter. That's an important point. And the most common complication or the most important investigation which you have to do after CVP is to take an X-ray to rule out a pneumothorax. Okay, that's an important question. You can get a clinical question also which says that a CVP has been attempted and there is some reduced air entry, reduced chest movement, etc., indicating there is a pneumothorax. Remember that. Even you get an X-ray also. I've seen few questions on that too. So please remember that. Another point is, when you do a CVP, you need to get a Trendelenburg position or head-low position, which will cause the vein to enlarge, so it is easy for you to enter. The most commonly performed ones are interjugular as well as a subclavian. Okay, so these are the two common sites which you do CVP insertion. Now, another point which you need to remember, suppose somebody asks you an extra question in AIIMS. Now, see, number 2 lumen, it is short. So this short lumen is used to measure. It is easier, it is having a less conducting space, so more precise measure. Short lumen is for measurement, other two lumens are for administration of fluid and blood, things like that. This is a J-tipped guide wire over which you pass a CVP catheter. You can see the J-tip here, that means it is less traumatic, it doesn't cause any trauma to the vascular endothelium. Now, if you pass a catheter over a J-tip guide wire, then this is known as the Seldinger technique. That is also an important question. Seldinger technique. Okay, Seldinger. So this will give you almost all questions on CVP. Okay. Now, if you see such a cart where you can see multiple things like a defibrillator. You see a defibrillator, you see an IV stand, you also see a cylinder, emergency oxygen cylinder, a trolley for drugs. This all indicates this is a arrest cart, or you can even see an ambo bag to that, or it is otherwise known as a crash cart. Now, whenever the patient in any of the scenario of an operation theatre get into cardiac arrest, you immediately rush the crash cart, which will contain almost everything needed for resuscitating, starting from endotracheal tubes to oxygen administration, drugs for emergency use, defibrillators, etc. This is known as crash cart. This is also being asked. Okay. Now, another one is this question. Please remember, if you get a cannula like this, which is mostly red in color, and you can lock this, which has got a lock, you can slide this and lock. This is known as the intra-arterial blood pressure monitoring cannula, or you can very well say intra-arterial cannula. There are two types. One, you can have a small catheter kind of thing, which is non-pliable, very stiff one. You pass over a guide wire after achieving. This is a guide wire, and this is the needle which is used for puncturing. This is also an example of arterial cannulating system. Okay, so you can get two. One is this type, or this is another type. This is used for femoral cannulation, or this is used, the number one is used for radial. So depending upon the site and the age of the patient, you can use either two of this. And this is also an important question. How do you identify a pressure transducer system? This is easy. This is a pressure transducer system used for intra-arterial blood pressure monitoring. This is identified by using a transducer. Got the point? So transducer usually has something like this blue colored thing, and it will be connected to a pressure bag. So when you see system like this, think about intra-arterial pressure monitoring. Now, size of cannula. This is also a very important question, most of the time repeated. This is pink in color. I'll give you a clue. Pink is usually 20 gauge in color, and it is usually for GA. Below 20 gauge, 22, 24, 26 are all used in pediatrics. 22, 24, 26. 22 and 24 is the most commonly used one. And when you come to the bigger one, the 18, 16, 14 are all used for massive transfusions, large blood volume, large fluids to administer. You use wide bore cannulas. 14, 16, 18 are considered as a wide bore cannula, of which 18 and 16 are the most commonly used, and 18 is the most commonly used for regional technique, where the most common indication is hypotension, or the most common side effect of regional blockade is hypotension. So in order to give that, you put a large bore cannula, the 18 gauge, most commonly. However, 16, 14 and 18 are considered as wide bore cannulas. Now I'll give you a simple code which will make you easy to remember this depending upon that. See, this is a code. Great Green Park's beautiful yellow valley. Okay, you can see that. Great Green Park's beautiful yellow valley. If you can remember this, it is easy to remember. See, Great Green Park's beautiful yellow valley. Depending upon if you remember, it is orange is 14, and you can slowly come down to the next. As you come down, the number increases, the size reduces. You should also be in a position to remember at least the flow rate. This is the flow rate I've written here. The flow rate in the most commonly used cannulas. For example, you should be able to know about these three. The flow rates in these three, because this is the most commonly used cannulas. So please remember the flow rates also. This is a very important slide which will help you to solve many of your MCQs, I'm sure. Now, we will now talk about something about the image, the positioning. Positioning, this is what is this position? So ask the question. Now, the simple clue to remember, you always get doubtful. We can easily rule out jackknife and lithotomy, but Trendelenburg and reverse Trendelenburg can be a problem. So I always remember this is your treasure, your brain, your treasure. So treasure down. Trendelenburg is nothing but treasure down. So this is how I remember. You can make your own codes, no harm. So Trendelenburg position is a position where you give head low to the patient. Now, what are the indications? Indication is when the patient is in hypotension. Hypotension. If you give Trendelenburg position, what will happen? It will suddenly increase the cardiac output to almost to a tune of around 9% increase in cardiac output in 1 minute. Okay, 9% increase in 1 minute. That's important, and which will sustain almost for 5 to 10 minutes. That's an important point which you need to remember. So when you want to put a CBP line, when you think you give a Trendelenburg position, because the chance for air embolism, air getting into the system is less. Okay, so you get the veins dilated. When you have in a hypotension, you give Trendelenburg position because cardiac output increases, because the venous return increases. Also, whenever you do laparoscopics, they ask you to give Trendelenburg position, because that will help for easy exposure, especially at the lower abdominal laparoscopies. So these are the common indications where you have to go for Trendelenburg position. Now, what is the problem with Trendelenburg position? Because it increases the ICP, it increases the IOP, it also increases the pressure of the abdominal contents onto the lung, producing reduced functional residual capacity. So chances for atelectasis is more. Now, with this juncture, you should also be able to identify few other. If the treasure down is Trendelenburg, if the treasure up is reverse Trendelenburg position. Where do you use reverse Trendelenburg position? When again in laparoscopic surgeries, you need to go for reverse Trendelenburg position. And this is also good when you want to get your bowel down, so that they can do upper surgeries like cholecystectomy, etc. They use for the reverse Trendelenburg position. The problem is, the side effect of this is that the patient can go for hypotension, because the venous return is reduced, so there is less cardiac output. Now, this is the most commonly used position, supine, which is good for normal surgeries. And usually one point which you need to remember, when you lie supine, you should always make sure the pressure point should be padded, and the arm should never be extended more than 90 degree. The arm should be never be abducted more than 90 degree, because it will cause brachial plexus injury. So that is an important point. And all neuropraxias will manifest less than 72 hours. So any neuropraxia that is happening after 72 hours, don't consider it as a pressure induced neuropraxia. Okay. Now, another point which you need to remember, the same supine position, if you make the patient in a sitting position, somewhat park bench position, or a little more relaxed, this is the best position for monitored anesthesia care. Monitored anesthesia care, a little more elevated. If you make it still straight, sitting position, this is used for shoulder surgeries, posterior cranial fossa surgery. Sitting position is used for posterior fossa surgeries, neurosurgeries, especially in the posterior area, and also in shoulder arthroscopies. The problem with sitting is that whenever you see a patient in a sitting position, the first thing that should come to your mind is there is a higher risk for venous air embolism. And the best way to diagnose a venous air embolism is by using transesophageal echocardiography, TEE. That's an important question that has been asked. Okay, transesophageal echocardiography. Now, which is this position? This is called the lithotomy position. In lithotomy position, what is what is it used for? It is used for perineal surgeries. Okay, and it is the problem with lithotomy is that it can produce neuropraxia mostly of the common peroneal nerve. It can also produce sciatic nerve. The point is you should raise the leg and bring down the leg together. If you make it one by one, then your spine is going to produce a traction and it's going to harm. So, and if it is not properly padded, you will get a common peroneal injury. That is an important question. And another point is that you are also going to get another issue called compartment syndrome here. Lithotomy, compartment syndrome. Why compartment syndrome of the lower limb? Because the blood is not entering, because it has come down, it is kept in an elevated position. At the same time, because of the compression of the vessels, the venous stasis happen and remain for long time, produce compartment syndrome. So compartment syndrome, neuropraxia of common peroneal and sciatic, spine traction are all features of lithotomy. At the same time, you remember lithotomy also reduces a FRC. Okay. Now, this is known as the lateral decubitus position. Lateral decubitus position. In lateral decubitus position, what's the point which you need to remember is that you have to keep a roll just caudal to the axilla, just here, not into the axilla, or just caudal to the axilla, because to prevent a brachial plexus injury. Another point what you need to remember about lateral position is that the lower hand should be extended, and it is the one where you have to put your pulse oximetry or arterial line, so that any compression of the neurovascular bundle you can pick up earlier. Okay, so that is an important point. And if you flex both knees in the lateral position, that becomes the jackknife position. Jackknife position can also be done by flexing the knee, in making the patient in prone position also, but this is the commonly practiced one. Whenever the knees are flexed, in order to expose the perineum, you call it as jackknife position. Clear? And it is usually for perineal surgery. Now, one more modification of the lateral decubitus position is that you break the table by, as you can see in this diagram, you break the table in order to push the central part up by a small segment of the table, so that the kidney become exposed. This is also known as kidney position. Now, one more point about the lateral position is that in lateral position, always make sure the lower or the dependent leg is flexed. Okay, and upper leg is extended, and it should all be padded. Now, the final one is the prone position. In the prone position, usually for spine surgery, the problem with prone position is that it can cause eye pressure, and eyes are the most commonly injured structures. Always make sure while proning the pressure points are padded properly, and the eyesight can be lost by central retinal artery occlusion, CRAO, is because of the prone position and the pressure applied. So these are all questions which you will get on positioning. Now, any question if you get, you need to answer. Okay. And what you find lying unconscious while jogging and morning, what is you do? Remember the SRK's vital compressions. Right, SRK. Here there is scene is safe, R is response, C for the response, and call for K is for call for help. So here we check pulse is absolutely not required. That is not the first steps at all. And call for help, you have on two things. Then comes SRK's vital compressions. This is the correct answer. See, this is how it is going to help. SRK's vital compressions. Shahrukh holds good many times. Now, coming to the next one, which is known as the current topic, this is very important to identify. You are going to surely get a question on that, because this has been widely used nowadays in the COVID scenario. This is nothing other than the HFNO, high flow nasal oxygen. You can see small prongs here into which you can put it into the nose and provide high flow of gases. This is a diagram of HFNO. Please remember this. This is going to be a question for you. Now, I am going to tell you about few points which is useful to you regarding the oxygen delivery devices. Oxygen delivery devices can be variable devices. Oxygen delivery devices can be variable performance devices and fixed performance devices. Variable performance means the FiO2 can vary. FiO2 can vary depending upon the patient's effort, while fixed performance devices FiO2 is fixed. It is independent of patient effort. The classic example of variable performance devices is the nasal cannula, which you are going to see, the Hudson mask, which you can see in this figure, Hudson mask, Hudson face mask, okay, oxygen hood, etc. and non-rebreathing mask, etc. These are all examples. While fixed performance devices are the most common asked question is our Venturi mask, breathing circuits, and ventilators. And also ambo bag, that is also a question, ambo bag. You can say how much FiO2, you can provide 100% FiO2 using ventilators, ambo bag and breathing circuit. You can provide 100% FiO2. Okay, so that is also a question. Now see this is the nasal cannula. You put the nostrils into this and provide oxygen. Depending upon, you can give up to 4 to 6 liters is a maximum, but normally you give only up to 5 liters, and you can provide an FiO2 of 24% to almost 45% of FiO2. That's a maximum you can give. The problem is if you give too much of air, it can cause crusting, and the biggest problem is it is non-humidified oxygen. Clear? Now this is called the Hudson mask or the variable performance mask, or example is Hudson mask, variable performance mask or the Hudson mask. This is important because here you can give a little more percentage of FiO2. You can give to a maximum of around 50%. You can give, it can start giving a flow of 4 to 10 liters. Beyond that, again, it becomes very difficult. So usually you keep it anything between 4 to 8 liters. So up to 50%, you remember the same issue happens here. It is non-humidified, claustrophobic, and the FiO2 varies. It is variable performance. Okay. Now that is why we have come up with something known as, which works on the principle of Venturi principle. In the Venturi principle, the air is entrailed, a high jet of flow through a small nostril, small nozzle cause air to entrail from the side, providing the peak flow. But the advantage of Venturi is that it is economical, because with a small amount of oxygen, you can get a lot of air from outside, and you can provide fixed FiO2. That's the advantage of Venturi mask. The most commonly asked question is, how much is the maximum percentage? It is 60% FiO2 you can provide using a Venturi mask. The next question is about if you add a reservoir bag to this is the reservoir bag to a Hudson mask, then you call it as non-rebreathing mask with reservoir. This is a classic example. Now why it is called non-rebreathing? Because it has got two one-way valve. It will provide air to pass out, not in. In is not done. Same here. Another valve is also here. It can allow the air to pass into this direction, oxygen to pass in this direction, but not in this direction. So if both these two valves are there, then it is called non-rebreathing mask with reservoir with two valves. This will provide 100% FiO2. Another point you need to remember is that this bag has to be filled first before you keep to the patient, and it should be minimum half full before you keep on to the patient. So these are the important questions you will get on this one. Now this is the HFNO, high flow nasal oxygen, which will delay intubation in COVID-19 patients. How do you identify? You can see similar trolley, and the most important thing is a flow meter. You can see, you can adjust a flow meter. The normal flow meter is only around 12 liters is maximum you can give through anesthesia machine, but here you can give up to 60 to 70 liters per minute. That's a high flow. Why? That is why it is called high flow. It can give up to a very high percentage of 95 to 100% of FiO2. Okay. Now the biggest advantage is not only that, it provides, you can see a humidifier. It can provide humidified oxygen, and another advantage, it can also provide a PEEP. Because of the high flow which is maintained, it can provide a high PEEP of around 5 to 6 centimeters of water. These are all, and it can delay the intubation. It can reduce the work of breathing. So this is somewhere placed in between the non-invasive ventilation and intubation. Okay, so this is an important question which you need to remember. Now, this is another question about the doses of adrenaline which we have to remember. See, for anaphylaxis, when you use in intramuscular route, the dose is 1 in 1000. You don't have to dilute them. Give it either intramuscularly or you use it subcutaneously. And if it is used for as a test dose in epidural anesthesia, the concentration is 1 in 2 lakh. 1 in 2 lakh. 1 in 2 lakh is the concentration. And usually we give 15 microgram of adrenaline as 3 cc of local anesthetic. In 3 cc of local anesthetic is the test dose, 15 microgram, which will produce an increase in heart rate of 20% or an increase in blood pressure of 20 millimeters of mercury. Clear? And this should happen in a period of 30 seconds. So this is how you diagnose whether the drug has, the local anesthetic has gone into the intravascular space. Now, when you give cardiac arrest intravenous route, it is 1 in 10,000, which you have already seen. 1 in 10,000, and this has to be given at every 3 to 5 minutes. And as an adjuvant to local anesthetic, regarding adrenaline used as an adjuvant in local anesthetic, there can be 2 concentration, 1 in 2 lakh or 1 in 1 lakh. Both have been used. Many books say 1 in 2 lakh. That's what the most commonly practiced, but there are books even say 1 in 1 lakh. Both you should accept. Okay. So that's about the adrenaline concentration. And the last question is about 30-year-old patient had a road traffic accident. Intravenous morphine was given 1 hour later. That's an important question. 1 hour later, respiratory depression has happened and blood pressure and heart rate has also come down. So what's the most probably reason? Now, the question has got some issues with recalling. Anyway, we will discuss the important aspect why. Now, first of all, when you suspect a head injury, morphine should not be given. Okay, because morphine is contraindicated whenever you suspect a head injury. Clear? Now, if at all you give morphine, the point which is against morphine-induced respiratory distress in this patient is the peak action of morphine comes in around 12 to 15 minutes. The onset of action of morphine comes in 12 to 15 minutes, and the peak action comes in 20 to 30 minutes. So, respiratory depression will never happen after 1 hour. Clear? So, morphine intravenous administration will produce its onset in 15 minutes, peaks it in half an hour, easy way to remember, and then it lasts for 4.5 to 6 hours. That's the duration of morphine. If it is fentanyl, which is a fast acting, very highly potent, 1000 times potent than morphine, which is commonly used nowadays, fentanyl is used nowadays. If it is fentanyl, the onset is within 3 minutes, peak action will come in 5 minutes. Okay, so but it is short-lived. Effect goes in 20 minutes. So in this case, if morphine-induced respiratory distress has to happen, it would have happened at least in 15 to half an hour time interval, not after 1 hour. So that removes morphine. And another thing, if there has been a head injury, patient would not have received morphine also. The second option is probably a head injury induced reduced respiratory drive. So that is important point. So that is probably the answer, because a head injury patient gradually getting increased further bleed producing delayed respiratory depression is probably the scenario as per this. Morphine addiction is out of question, it's only in chronic use. And the other option is none of the above. That depends upon how the question has framed and depending upon the quality how which you can recall that question. If this is the scenario, then probably it is a head injury induced decreased respiratory drive. At this point, I just want to tell you one more point about morphine induced respiratory depression is that usually morphine take away the respiratory drive of patient who are having hypercapnia. Remember, whenever there is hypercapnia as well as hypoxia. So remember, in normally hypercarbia stimulate breathing. Everybody knows that. But if it goes to a higher level of more than 70 millimeters of mercury, then hypercarbia causes respiratory depression. So it is a range which you need to remember. Hypercarbia induced respiration and above 70 it causes respiratory depression. And regarding morphine and hypercapnia and hypoxia, because whenever there is hypoxia, you triggers respiration, and whenever you give morphine to such patients, what will happen? Their chances for respiratory depression is more. But the chance become all the more increase when you provide oxygen to these patients, because oxygen drives away the hypoxic drive, and that causes further chance for respiratory depression. This is a key element in COPD patients also. Remember, so in nutshell, avoid morphine for head injury patients. If it has respiratory depression is to happen, it will happen in 15 to 30 minutes. And remember about the hypercapnic range. Normally hypercapnia stimulate respiration, but above 70 millimeters, it inhibits respiration. And also remember that morphine, if administered to a patient who is on oxygen, who is hypercapnic, there is a high chance for respiratory depression. Okay, so these are all important points which you come across in your INI CT examination in the recent times, and I wish all the very best for your exams, and do keep updated. If you have any doubts, you can get back to me. Okay, thank you.